We're recording.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Montclair Planning Board. Notice of this meeting is posted in the lobby of this building and published in the local papers. We are being broadcast live on Channel 34, and we are being streamed live on montclair.peg.tv. Just for introductory sake, this is a quasi-judicial proceeding. We have the powers and procedures that resemble a court of law, and we are obligated to objectively determine facts and draw conclusions from them in order to provide an official action. Therefore, any questions and comments to this board should be limited to the issues that the board can legally consider in reaching such a determination, and decorum appropriate for a judicial hearing must be maintained at all times. This evening, we will be continuing the application on the Lackawanna Plaza application, and we are at the stage where we will be receiving public comment. For our purposes, can I have an indication from the public of exactly how many people intend to testify? Or not testify, but to comment. Okay, so we have well over a majority of the room would like to be heard on this, and therefore it's going to be necessary for us to limit the time that everybody has in order so that we can hear everybody this evening. And we'll therefore be allowing statements from the public based on a 3-minute time limit. So with that said, let's go on to the roll call.
Chair Wynn?
Here.
Vice Chair Brodock?
Here.
Mr. Schwartz?
Here.
Councilor Schlager?
Here.
Ms. Willis? Here. Mr. Rooney?
Here.
Mr. Ian Wally is excused. Ms. Lockman? Here. Mr. Barr? And Mr. Gilmer?
Here.
Okay.
Okay. And we don't have any minutes to deal with this evening. So that allows us to proceed. Excuse me?
Yeah, with the resolution, maybe. Yeah, let's do that.
It's at the end. Okay.
Really?
I was
Well,
going
that's where it is
by-
on the agenda.
going by the agenda that
I mean, if you want to get the administrative stuff out of the way.
I think let's get right to the heart of this evening's matter. Lackawanna Plaza application. Gentlemen, take your positions.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good evening. All right. We concluded all of the testimony at our last meeting. We do have a sign-up list, and at least according to the one that I have, it looks like Mr. DeSalvo has the #1 spot. So good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Chair Wynn. Good evening, former colleagues.
Sir, if you could just raise your right hand before we start.
Yep.
Swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
We're not swearing in people for public comment.
Comments? All right. Just being
Not testimony.
Most of this will be opinion, but it will all be true to the best of my ability anyway. Jason DeSalvo, 36 Prospect Avenue, Montclair resident for 21 years and former vice chair of the planning board. Former colleagues and members of the public, it amazes me that the deliberation about this development as proposed continues. If ever there was a more cut and dry case in our town for demanding the preservation of a historical structure, this is it. Montclair literally exists as the urban suburb that it is because of Lackawanna Station. It was designed by an award-winning architect. It remains completely intact as a historical structure. It's been designated as a local, state, and national historic landmark that's also located within a designated Montclair Historic District. These are matters of law, fact, and public trust, not just opinion. We simply cannot conveniently ignore our responsibility to preserve this structure. For these reasons, both Montclair's Historical Preservation Committee and the Planning Board's own architectural advisor have rejected the developer's plan currently before the board. Frankly, one could make a very compelling argument that any plan put before this board should have been rejected immediately upon receipt, if not completely respecting and protecting Lackawanna Station as a historic structure. However, a highly quality grocery store is very much needed in this area of our town, and fellow residents and the planning board have had to endure an incredibly lengthy process as we've been presented with what seems like an endless stream of variations on the same theme. Lots of residential units, huge required parking variances, and a massive grocery store worthy of Route 46 that can only be built if we demolish the majority of Lackawanna Station. Why? Because of a lack of vision and the willingness to employ great design that could turn what would otherwise be another ho-hum box store style development into a true region-wide destination, not because it's what's in the best interest of our town. But economics and politics make strange bedfellows, and the owner of the property has very shrewdly made it seem that the only way for a grocery store to be built on this parcel is for us to simply ignore the responsibility that we have to preserve what is arguably Montclair's most important remaining historical structure, when in fact the reality is that through thoughtful design we can easily do both. Throughout the excruciating process, we've collectively allowed ourselves to accept that a grocery store and completely preserving Lackawanna Station must be mutually exclusive. They are not. The board has the right, and I personally believe the responsibility, to mandate that any development it approves on this parcel by way of allowing even the most minute of variances provides that Lackawanna Station be completely and thoroughly preserved in its entirety, and that a grocery store of a certain size must be part of the approved plan. If the owner of the property doesn't like that solution, they can either sell the parcel to someone who will accept those, or develop the parcel in a way consistent with local land use laws that does not require any of the rather extreme variances that you are being asked to give. Just to be clear, I'm not in favor of the train sheds being relegated to merely being used as glorified ornamental parking structures. That is historical desecration, not preservation. Build the grocery store in the existing station. We've seen time and again through our region, that high quality adaptive reuse of historical structures can truly be transformative to communities. The High Line Chelsea Market, former Bush Terminal in Brooklyn, now Industry City, just to name a few. In every case, when high quality redevelopment that respects what would exist, historic structures, instead of being razed, they do great things for the community. To summary, my personal opinion, and one that I would be fiercely fighting for were I still on the dais with you, stop sending mixed messages and respect the input of both your architectural advisor and the town's Historical Preservation Committee. Mandate that any plan put forth requiring variances both completely preserves Lackawanna Station and includes a much-needed grocery store. We can have both. I'm sorry I went over.
Okay, good evening. William Scott, 23 Cedar Avenue. I'm also the chair of the NAACP Housing Committee. With me I have tonight is Beverly Bussey, who is the second vice president of the NAACP Montclair branch. And I also have Rosita Dobson, who is also the health chair of the NAACP branch. And Ms. Dobson will be reading a brief statement into the record. But I just wanted to give a little background from my perspective of being a resident of the township for 69 years. Those 69 years have been spent in the 4th Ward. I've unfortunately seen over the last 50 to 60 years the loss of 4 supermarkets in our community. This project is very dear to our community, not only from a 3rd and a 4th Ward standpoint, but really town-wide. Ms. Dobson is going to read into the record the fact that we do support the town's resolution going back to May of 2017, but the fact that we do support a full-scale supermarket, and we wanted to make sure that that was on the record. We did take the time as a community to do a little survey. We did a survey over a 48-hour period of time, and we've got about 250 residents, former residents of Montclair that did support the initial site plans moving forward that was introduced to the planning board several months ago. So, Ms. Thompson?
Good evening. I'm Rosita Dotson, 4 Willowdale Court, and I too have been in Montclair for 62 years. Dear Montclair Planning Board members, in the 102 years the Montclair branch NAACP has been in existence, it has been more than 300. It's more than 300 in the 102 years that Montclair branch NAACP has existed. And more than 300 members have advocated for civil rights, social justice, consistent with the NAACP Constitution and bylaws. We state today to advise that a body of the oldest and the largest civil rights organization in the world will stand firmly behind the adoption of R-18157. The resolution drafted by the Council of Montclair Township on May 22nd, 2018, in its resolve to maintain the integrity of Lackawanna Plaza, including but not limited to the restoration of a full-scale supermarket to serve the residents of Montclair community, the Council urged the Planning Board to consider the current plan favorable and with dispatch. We stand in agreement that the historical value of the site should not be compromised, but further offer that the aesthetic value of the site should be consistent with that of the original design. For close to 30 years, the Pathmark supermarket provided a local place for Montclair residents, particularly those who reside in the 4th Ward, to shop for food and critical items related to nutrition and overall health. Since the closing of the supermarket, residents have either been forced to travel longer distance in and out of Montclair to shop or frequent local bodegas or convenience store where the cost of basic items are also double in cost compared to the supermarket or supercenter. This is unconscionable. Moreover, since health and wellness is a major mandate of the NAACP, our goal is to advocate for the rights of every individual to have equal access to proper nutrition. Lastly, members of the Montclair branch NAACP Housing, Health, and Educational Council Chair, along with the township residents and other affiliated groups signing off in support of this position, urges the Planning Board to take a positive with respect to the concerns raised in R-18157, together with those offered by the NAACP, and to work with us as we move towards a final design of Lackawanna Center. Thank you.
Last comment. We were.
I've already given you guys 4 minutes.
Okay.
I've already given you guys 4 minutes.
Okay.
If everybody does this,
Okay.
we're not going to get to everybody, okay? You really should have come up as 2 separate individuals. Then you could have gotten 6 minutes between you.
I thought you were going to state that, but that didn't occur. So, but you know, Mr. Stoller, you know, we've spoken about this application obviously for several months, and I think I've posed on a couple of occasions. Would you make the development or the start of the project as it relates to the Lackawanna Plaza your #1 goal to start with the supermarket construction? And I think we've talked about that on occasion, but really would like to see you make that a priority in the construction process and time frame. And I see you nodding your head, but can I get some confirmation here? Thank you.
Okay, so on the record, you're saying that you would build the supermarket before you'd build anything else? Is that what you're saying, Mr. Stoller?
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we are going to prioritize it to build it as fast and as quickly as we can. I can't tell you without any construction drawings be done whether nothing could happen first, but the goal is to make that the first thing that we're doing and to do everything possible. There might be work that goes on simultaneously, but the goal is to do that as quickly as we can.
Justin Philip Waldman.
Hello. Oh, it works. Cool. This is Justin Waldman, Philip Waldman. I live on 11 Seymour Street, apartment number 15, Montclair, New Jersey. And I just wanted to comment and say that as a resident of Montclair since 2006, it was always convenient going to Pathmark since it was a close walking distance and the prices were affordable. Unfortunately, since Pathmark closed in 2015, it has been a hassle commuting to Bloomfield Foodtown or West Caldwell ShopRite in order to shop for affordable groceries. I bet the problem is more exasperating for the senior citizens and working class residents of the 3rd and 4th wards. It is imperative the planning board allows the developer to start building at Lackawanna Plaza so a new affordable supermarket can set up shop there. Every time I go grocery shopping in either West Caldwell ShopRite or Bloomfield Foodtown is every time where possible tax dollars that could have gone to Montclair are now being spent in Bloomfield or West Caldwell. With all due respect, throughout the years when people went to Lackawanna Plaza, they didn't go to admire the historical architecture. They went to a place where they could shop for affordable groceries, get their laundry done, or get affordable products at the dollar store, like myself. If this project doesn't get built due to the length of this process, the developer could move to other greener pastures, and Lackawanna could be vacant for a long time. No different than the dilapidated, empty, vacant places you see in places like Patterson or Camden. The waiting must stop. You must start building. And one last point, the developer reduced the housing units nearly 60%, which is unheard of on these sort of projects. Please give them your full support. Thank you.
Godlewski.
Thank you very much. Frank Godlewski, Essex Fells. I want to be very brief. I fully agree with the points that Mr. DeSalvo made. And I disagree with the point of view of the Montclair chapter of the NAACP. I'm a member of the NAACP for many, many years. And I think that there is a responsibility for a grocery store. It's a town-wide responsibility. And this kind of urgency to me seems like a manufactured crisis for the 4th Ward. It's for the whole town. And I think there's a responsibility for the landmark and the real estate values. Thank you.
Judith Rich.
Good evening, Judith Rich, 15 Carolyn Road, Montclair. There have been heated debates about the Lackawanna Station property for generations. We moved here in 1975 in order for me to commute from the Lackawanna train station. Thank you to all of you for the time and energy that you devote to the task of planning. However, from the point of view of a longtime resident, changes to the downtown landscape here have been horrifying. I understand the decision to construct ugly parking decks, unsightly Valiant Bloom, looming hotel complex, which, if you look from Orange Road, looks something like a prison. I assume that the plans for 2 residential towers on either side of Grove Street are set, but I respectfully suggest that we not make similar mistakes. Please preserve the attractiveness of this historic train station. Do not create another traffic and parking nightmare. And please consider a food store on the scale of the very popular Cedar Grove Super Food Town. Visit 2 Essex County towns with very different ideas of what makes a downtown attractive and livable. South Orange Center now has looming high-rises over it, while Maplewood keeps to the scale and historic charm of that community's shopping district, including a small market, I might add. Please be responsive and responsible in your decision-making when considering how to develop the existing Lackawanna Plaza. Let's not make any more mistakes. Thank you.
Bruce Hain. Going once. Bruce. Priscilla Eichelman.
Hi, Priscilla Eshelman, 50 Label Street, Montclair. To the developer, I want to say I don't believe you have acted in good faith during this process. You have never displayed an interest in learning about the site's existing elements. If you were even remotely open to repurposing Lackawanna Station, you would have welcomed the HPC to walk you through the site. Further, when you said you had allowed the HPC to vet your inventory on the site, that was not true. You never asked your architect to try a plan using the existing structures, and you never asked your parking designer to do so either. I'm fortunate to have lived in places where architects would have fallen over themselves to design something remarkable using any available existing features. They understand this is what draws consumers, makes for vibrant businesses, and wins awards. Rather than asking what could be removed, they would ask what could be saved and repurposed. This project is a natural for award-winning design, but you have no interest in that. You're blind to the possibilities of what it could be, and even worse, you've shown yourself to be blind to the needs of this community. In the last meeting, you put up a schematic of pedestrian pathways to the market, which illustrated the severe problems with your plan. Literally, the only safe, pleasant walk to the market's door is from the developer's very own office at 363 Bloomfield. Coming this one block down Bloomfield, the only street pedestrians must cross is at Lackawanna Plaza in Bloomfield, with a red light for drivers and a crosswalk with crossing signal for pedestrians. These pedestrians won't need to cross the driveway as they skirt around the valet operation. From every other direction, the path is a pedestrian hellscape and quite dangerous. Mr. Stoller, it was quite shocking when you said in the last meeting that, quote, no one lives over there, gesturing to Greenwood and Glenwood Avenues. Union Gardens is a large apartment complex directly across the street where hundreds of shoppers live. Beyond that are 2 long blocks of housing on Greenwood, and parallel to Greenwood, Willow and Forest teem with residents who would most conveniently enter the market from Glenridge. These are also the residents who will lose parking to your valet operation. Note the Walnut Street train station is 25% shorter walk to the site than Bay Street. These commuters would also naturally approach the market from Greenwood Avenue. Everyone coming from this direction will have to contend with trucks coming out of your delivery area, valets making left and right turns onto Glenridge, and the already heavy traffic heading up Glenridge. All of this without a crosswalk signal or stoplights to stop traffic. Coming from Grove Street, the options are even worse. Pedestrians will be forced to take a steep staircase or a ramp alongside cars in the driveway. If they're just trying to continue on foot down Grove, they will have to cross a 40-foot driveway where cars are making left and right turns without any traffic lights. Grove Street already has very heavy traffic, even before the 154 apartments in this project are built. So making a left or right out of the parking lot, is going to require split-second decision-making and a floored gas pedal. Is this a scenario where an elderly shopper or a stroller will be quick enough to get out of the way? Coming from Bloomfield southeast of the developer's block is the worst of all. These shoppers will either have to cross a 40-foot driveway on Bloomfield to walk alongside the Pigger Prince or take a parking lot path parallel to Grove and cross that driveway. Nothing speaks to the haphazard planning that has gone into this project like the fact that it is not legal to make a left turn into or out of the parking lot on Bloomfield. Members of this very panel confessed to doing this, and the developer's expert said that it was legal. It is not. It did not sound right to me that a car would be allowed to drive over a painted island in front of the Bloomfield entrance, and so I wrote to Lieutenant Stephanie Ignezzo, Traffic Bureau Commander of the Montclair Police Department. I've brought copies of her correspondence with the graphics we exchanged. I'm offended that the developer has put forth an expert after expert to justify removing existing architectural features, but not one single expert on pedestrian safety. This in an area with a walk score of 95 and housing to be marketed as close to transit. I don't see how you can have possibly effectively marketed the site to a supermarket when you don't understand who the shoppers will be or where they will come from. To the planning board, I want to say your work is vitally important. It strikes me as wholly inappropriate that the city council has voted to tell you to rubber stamp this project. 2 pedestrians were killed in Montclair in 2018. This should rest very, very heavily on you. You are our only hope that planning will take real-world impact from development into account. I don't know how you can even be sure what you're being asked to approve, as the numbers and design elements of this plan have changed from meeting to meeting, sometimes even in the same meeting. Numerous times the developer has said to ignore the incorrect plans in front of you and just listen to the numbers they are speaking. This smacks of hubris and carelessness when lives are at stake. To be clear, the developer has not presented a plan for a supermarket. His plan is for a 47,000 square foot shell he can fill with any business zone for the site. We have heard from only one urban supermarket expert who said, based on competition from other markets in the area, this market should be 25,000 square feet. He said the developer's building is too large and the parking lot is too small to sustain a profitable supermarket. The developer himself recently said his only two prospects at this time want 25,000 or 37,000 square feet respectively. A smaller scale building would provide more parking, a less frantic parking lot, and with more thoughtful design, safer pedestrian access. The lack of left turn access to and from Bloomshield should have been a critical design consideration of this plan. You cannot reasonably allow the developer's experts to say at this late hour that it is no big deal. Bloomfield is the primary artery through town, and this driveway is addition to a bus stop serving 4 bus lines and a grammar school. There's nothing about this plan that justifies a parking variance. It reminds me of the Supreme Court's definition of pornography. It has no redeeming characteristics.
Ms. Eiselman?
One more sentence. It doesn't celebrate a historic site, it doesn't provide safe and convenient access to shoppers, and it does not suit an urban supermarket, which is what we so desperately need. Thank you.
Okay. Please be considerate to other people who want to speak. Again, mindful of the amount of time that we're trying to allow everybody. Carolyn Kane Levy.
I think it was James Cotter.
Was James Cotter? I'm sorry. I skipped James Cotter. Carter's choice.
My name is Caroline Kane Levy. I live at 37 Ardsley Road in the 4th Ward. I'm speaking as a Montclair resident with a professional background in historic preservation. I've worked at the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission for 30 years. There's irony in the fact that threats to another train station, Grand Central Station, led to the 1978 Supreme Court ruling upholding New York City's landmarks law as a valid public purpose. Lackawanna has survived threats as well, and in the early 70s was saved from the wrecking ball in a hard-fought battle against an ill-advised redevelopment plan. It was subsequently put on the state and national registers of historic places and adaptively reused with federal funding to become the enclosed mall we see today. None of this critical information was shared with the HPC or the Planning Board when a new outrageous development plan was floated last year and ultimately dropped. It made the current plan look almost reasonable, which indeed may have been a strategy by the developer. What I'm seeing today here in Montclair is a throwback to short-sighted attitudes of 40 years ago. I understand you are under tremendous pressure to get a supermarket back at Lackawanna Plaza, but it need not require the demolition of the historic building. We all here support the presence of a supermarket at the site. However, we also know the historic building is eminently usable. To cast the choice as one or the other is a false dichotomy. We've seen more than one viable alternative that preserves the building in its entirety. These plans keep the train canopies in place, activate Glenridge Avenue, and create a pedestrian-scaled supermarket as a potential focal point for a walkable downtown, all goals of the town's master plan. Under Montclair's Historic Preservation Ordinance, developers have the burden to show that an important and vital historic building cannot be retained and reused. Here they are also seeking a variance. The proposed variance is directly to the demolition of the historic structure important to the town and region, yet the developers have failed to satisfy the heavy burden of proof. They have not proven that the only way to bring a supermarket to the site is to demolish the sheds. They have not proven that the structure is not historic or has been architecturally compromised. At least 3 other consultants hired by the town itself have disputed this. They have not investigated valuable state and federal tax credits for historic preservation. They have not made a case for why you should approve an application with variances that contradict the master plan. They are asking for a 400-plus parking variance in an already parking-starved downtown. I take issue with the fact that we've never been told who the tenant is and that a supermarket representative has never appeared before this body or the HPC to be questioned or to affirm the claims of the developer. There's been testimony that a 40 to 50,000 square foot supermarket with limited parking in this location may not be sustainable. We've also heard that there are new supermarket chains making inroads into the region which specialize in smaller stores, such as the Spanish Aki and the German Aldi. If the plans go forward as proposed, we may end up with a white elephant in no time and a parking lot the size of a football field tearing a hole in the historic fabric of the town center historic district. With such limited vision, perhaps Pinnacle and Hampshire are not the right developers for the site, and it's time for them to sell and move on. Or maybe that is their expectation, that the project will fail, the historic building will be gone, and left is a very large development site, perfect for residential or some other type of development. Thank you.
Hi, my name is James Cotter. I'm a representative of the Clover Hill Place Grove Terrace Neighborhood Association. I live at 21 Clover Hill Place. Thank you for letting us testify. We are encouraged that a grocery store is going to be the main feature of the defunct Pathmark space. The Fourth Ward desperately needs a supermarket, and this is central to the current plan. We support this part of the application with a few caveats. We should temper our enthusiasm for the prospect of a grocery tenant for a number of reasons. This developer has not identified an operator and has been reluctant to share details of their negotiations. It might have been prudent for them to include potential operators in these public discussions to guide the planning board in their deliberations. In the absence of this transparency, we are left to guess on how the intentions and needs of any potential operator will coincide with the needs of the community. And despite the hopes of many in my neighborhood and in the Fourth Ward, we should be absolutely clear. It will be years before a supermarket arrives in Lackawanna. The developers are building a hotel on Orange Road. They have not even started the Seymour Street project. They haven't finished their responsibilities to Valley and Bloom, and it will be years before they break ground on this project. So any decision on this application should not be made with the prospect of an expedient installation of a supermarket. Even if you approve this application tonight, nothing will arrive anytime soon. Instead, we should focus on the myriad issues that confront us with this application. We strenuously object to any plan that would create a 4-lane highway on Grove Street. This is out of character with the residential nature of the surrounding neighborhoods. It will create an unnecessary and dangerous speedway. Instead, we should be looking to create wider sidewalks, shoulders, bike lanes, and other safe traffic slowing impacts. We reject the conclusions of any traffic study that deems there will be little impact to the circulation of surrounding streets, especially conclusions that do not consider ongoing development projects in the direct orbit of Lackawanna, including the Seymour Street project, the Mountainside Hospital expansion, the construction of apartment buildings on Seymour, on Baldwin, multiple sites on Willow Street, and multiple sites on other parts of town. The sea of parking that is planned for the site is wholly out of character with downtown Montclair. It runs counter to the master plan. It runs counter to trends in retail shopping, especially given the rise of online ordering and the delivery of groceries. We are building a site that would be perfect for Route 46 in 1988. Ironically, even with the sea of parking that will front the site, the developer is still short 400 spaces to meet the 800 space requirement. Thus, the variance requested by the developer must provide relief for the township in some meaningful way. Nothing in this plan addresses this massive parking deficit. The shared parking and valet scheme is inadequate. It is ill-conceived and was presented as an off-the-cuff idea without regard to cost to shoppers, access to available spots, and demand for parking throughout the site. Historic preservation was not at the top of our list of priorities at the beginning of this process. Perhaps it should have been. Over the course of this application, the lack of respect for the Fourth Ward in our history has become more apparent. It is almost as if the developer bought a historic property and sought to willfully minimize its historic significance to meet its own ends. This tactic reached its zenith during the testimony of the developer's witness, Stephen Bedford. He testified that Lackawanna Station is not historic. There was nothing special about the site at all. It's just a podunk train station, indistinguishable from any other town in the United States. There's something particularly galling about this assertion. It comes despite the fact that Lackawanna Station is a local, state, and nationally designated historic site. It comes despite the fact that much of the reason Montclair thrived in the 20th century and developed in its current form is because of the history of train travel from this station. And it comes despite the fact that the last rehabilitation of the site deliberately sought to preserve the integrity of Lackawanna Station for generations of Montclairians. Who are we going to listen to? Our planning board consultants, our local historians, our local experts, and the citizen volunteers of the HPC, or a paid witness bought by the developer? Disrespect for Lackawanna Station negates the history of our town, especially the 4th Ward. We've been told time and time again that the history of the 4th Ward is unimportant, and we've been shown little regard for its landmarks, its neighborhood, and its people. To wit, an entire neighborhood was torn down to make the Montclair connection. The historic African-American YMCA was torn down and its significance forgotten. The original Crane homestead was physically uprooted and trucked to another ward in town. And yet, when the historic train station in Upper Montclair burned to ashes, miraculously, millions of dollars in public and private money was found to rebuild it. State Senator Nia Gill, the mayor of Montclair, and a galaxy of luminaries stepped forward to protect the site's integrity. Now is the time to enforce the same protections for Lackawanna Station in the 4th Ward. We deserve nothing less than the same respect for our history.
Deirdre Malloy. Deirdre Malloy. Kathleen Bennett.
Good evening, everyone. Kathleen Bennett, 10 Glenwood. Good evening, everyone. Kathleen Bennett, 10 Glenwood Road, chairperson of the HPC and resident in Montclair for 40 years. First, I'd like to express my gratitude to members of the Planning Board who have spent many hours hearing testimony concerning this application. It has often been frustrating, but we are invested in the process. We are invested as volunteers. The Planning Board and the HPC members attend these meetings as volunteers because we are invested in our town. We live here, we attend school here, we worship here, we raise our families here, we shop here, we dine here. Most of the people in this room are invested in Montclair for these reasons and many more. Montclair Ordinance 347-127, which established the HPC, maintains that the purpose of the HPC is to effect and accomplish the protection, enhancement, and continuity of especially noteworthy examples or elements of the township's environment. Besides safeguarding the architectural heritage of Montclair within the community, the HPC must discourage the unnecessary demolition of historic resources, because by doing so, we encourage the continued use of historic and noteworthy buildings, while fostering pride in the history and architecture of the community. So you see, we are only doing our job, just as you, the Planning Board, must do your job by voting on this project. As you consider this vote, please be aware of the master plan, the Montclair master plan, and whether your acceptance of the current plan goes against township planning policies, especially section 5.3.1, which states that the township master plan incorporates the historic preservation into many of its individual plan elements. Far-reaching benefits of historic preservation include the conservation of environmental resources through retaining existing buildings and infrastructure, the creation of vibrant downtowns, and economic stimulation through the growth of jobs associated with heritage tourism and the rehabilitation of historic structures. The current plan advocates the destructions of the train sheds, which are an integral part of the entire Lackawanna train station. We have heard testimony from the applicant's expert that the train sheds are not historic. We heard testimony in the past month the existing train sheds have no historic merit. Yet I offer you this picture, which accompanied the national nomination, in 1973. It clearly shows that the train sheds, this picture here, were part of the structures included in the nomination report. There was also confusion as to whether the train sheds were within the state and national nomination maps and on the website. Kenny Cole, the GIS specialist in the New Jersey State Historic Preservation Office, confirmed the GPS coordinates. These boundaries will be updated and publicly accessible on New Jersey's HPO map viewer. Photos and nomination report, which clearly state that the train sheds are part of the site. And I have this if anybody cares to look at it. It will also be up on the state's website. We all know that the current Lackawanna train station needs to be rehabilitated. The developer has not shown any interest in working with the concerns expressed by the HPC over the demolition of the train sheds. I met with the developer after the board chairperson requested I do so. The developer flatly stated that the only way the site would work would be to demolish the train sheds. If the current plan is approved, we will have a pastiche of the once vibrant train station, which still maintains a large percentage of its original character. In fact, the renovation of the 1980s, which created an enclosed mall, preserved the steel supports. We all wish that the developer, who's working with a highly competent architect, would direct them to create a building which would maintain these steel supports. This approach would be called adaptive reuse. National Park Service, since the passage of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, has placed over 800,000 properties on the National Register of Historic Places. One of them is the Lackawanna train station in Montclair. By maintaining the train sheds in their original position, Montclair will be preserving and honoring the importance of the trains held and still hold for Montclair. We all know the history of the Lackawanna station, how it was the terminus for the Delaware Erie and Lackawanna line originating in Hoboken. The Secretary of Interior standards were established in 1991 to guide the rehabilitation of historic structures. They've been developed to guide work for protection, stabilization, preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction. It defines that rehabilitation is a process of returning a property to the state of utility through repair and alteration, which makes possible an efficient and contemporary use while preserving those portions and features of the property which are significant to its historic, architectural, and cultural values. In this vibrant mosaic of a community we call Montclair, there are many voices. Let us not lose sight that they are our voices. A thriving community grocery store living in the current empty space for many years. The interior mall incorporated the train sheds in a sympathetic and evocative adaptive reuse. Please, let us show the residents of Montclair that we value our architectural heritage and demand that this developer be held to a higher standard than that which he has so far demonstrated. Thank you.
Excuse me? I don't think so. I don't remember. I don't remember. Richard Southwick.
Good evening. My name is Richard Southwick. I've been a practicing architect for 40 years. I specialize in the revitalization of historic buildings. I was elected a fellow of the AIA, and I speak to you as the director of historic preservation of the architectural firm Beyer Blinder Bell, and as an architectural partner of the late Richard Blinder. Dick Blinder was a lifelong resident of Montclair, served for many years on the planning board, and headed the Montclair Redevelopment Authority at the time the Lackawanna Plaza project was conceived. Although developed in the 1980s, the project was grounded in solid preservation policy, still very relevant today. The project adaptively reused an obsolete rail station and train shed for important community-based retail uses. The Lackawanna train station was listed on the National and State Registers of Historic Places in 1973 due to its architectural quality and historic significance as an extraordinary example of early suburban railroad design. The essential underpinnings of the 1980s redevelopment are perhaps more relevant today than even when the project was first developed.
Mr. Southwick?
Yes.
You know, understanding, you know, that maybe you do have a tangential association with this application. This is really supposed to be comment on the evidence and the testimony and the application as it was presented, okay? Right. So I really don't think that going off into the original development is appropriate.
Well, let's talk about the current proposal then.
If you want to talk about the current proposal, we'll allow you to comment on that, but please, again,
Sure.
keep your comments succinct. Of course, the clock is ticking.
Mr. Nguyen. The Fourth Ward needs a similarly sized food store to serve this local market, not a larger regional market. The insertion of a new supermarket within the existing structure is absolutely practical. Many successful examples of this exist, especially in the early 1990s food halls throughout the Northeast. Reading Market, Chelsea Market, even the City Retail Food Market in Arthur Avenue are all good examples of this type of building typology. Most recently, we have completed the installation of a new Whole Foods supermarket in the restored Haynes department store in Newark, so this can absolutely be done. These open grid structures provide light-filled retail spaces and regular column spacing to allow for the flexible plan layouts. This planning model has proved to be successful, can be employed at the Lackawanna train sheds. There's nothing more fundamental and environmentally smart than to reuse existing structures for new uses rather than to undertake demolition. The retention and rehabilitation of the existing Lackawanna train sheds keeps the original construction out of the waste stream, that is landfill, will employ considerably more labor than new construction in its rehabilitation, and significantly will retain the architectural unique sense of place of this distinguished Fourth Ward site, important to both the local community and the township overall. It is rare that new construction can replicate the significance of the site, and it is absolutely impossible to replace its authenticity. The 2016 historic preservation element of the Township of Montclair Master Plan calls for retaining and preserving the historic character of a property, and that the removal of historic materials or alteration of features and spaces that characterize a property should be avoided. Furthermore, the master plan strongly promotes sustainability through the retention of existing historic structures. Surely the removal of the historic train sheds is in violation of these sections of the master plan, certainly in principle, if not by technical interpretation. I strongly urge the planning board to consider a plan that retains existing train sheds and is more sensitive to the historic character of the site. Hampshire and Pinnacle have engaged a talented architectural team. I just believe they're on the wrong track. However, the original premise promoted by Dick Blinder when the project was first conceived, which preserved more of the National Register site, should be retained. I ask that the planning board request the applicant to revise their plans to retain the train sheds. This will result in a more appropriate project scaled to the neighborhood, which will maintain, even enhance, the significance of Lackawanna Plaza.
Thank you. We're getting into the handwritten entries, and the next one looks like John LeVay.
Hello, everybody. My name is John LeVay, and I live at 65 Club Road in Upper Montclair, New Jersey. As a longtime resident of Montclair, New Jersey, I've watched Lackawanna Plaza go through its struggles, and now, moving forward, it is very vital that we get a new affordable supermarket. It should not have to require to have demolish any of the malls, so that way they should really keep the all of the historical elements as much as possible. The mall, as many people know, is centrally located. It's within easy reach of multiple New Jersey Transit bus routes. And many people, when the Pathmark was open, one of the big benefits was many people could walk to the supermarket, especially those who lived in the Fourth Ward of Montclair. The location of where the Pathmark was not only easily accessible to downtown Montclair and the rest of the Fourth Ward, but other towns like Glen Ridge, and even parts of Bloomfield. As for access to get to the mall, like when people are getting off the buses, let's say coming from the west, there should be some sort of pedestrian underpass, like have an elevator, bringing people downstairs, so that way they do not have to walk across busy Bloomfield Avenue. And for the people who are, let's say, heading back to Newark from Lackawanna Plaza, when they get the buses heading back to Newark, they would have to presently walk across Bloomfield Avenue, and having that pedestrian underpass would help, because that way, like, they would not have to fear for their life about getting run over. I believe, and since taxes are extremely high in Montclair, people should not have to feel that they should have to pay very high taxes for little. That's one of the reasons why the downtown district needs that supermarket very fast. One that is affordable and caters to shopping 5 days a week, not one that is like Whole Foods. So developers, I think it's time to get the shovels ready and make people want to have good reasons on moving to Montclair.
Okay. Thank you. Cindy Steiner.
Thank you. I'm Cindy Steiner, 6 Jerome Place, Unit 1. I'm the executive director of the New Jersey Bike and Walk Coalition, which is headquartered here in Montclair. We're a state-level advocacy organization working for safer roads for pedestrians, bike riders, and drivers. In my professional role, I work with communities, meaning town councils and planning boards, to advise them on ways to make their towns more pedestrian and bike friendly. In full disclosure, Mr. Brian Stolar is our board chair. However, other than providing me with a copy of the layout of the project at my request, so that I could review in better detail the pedestrian access, he and I did not discuss my comments. In 2009, Montclair made a groundbreaking move by passing the state's first Complete Streets policy, which was a resolution to safely accommodate all road users in the town's street design. And further, as you know, the town has included bike and pedestrian access in its master plan. But since then, the town has done very little to actually implement that resolution, to the point where other towns have moved ahead of Montclair. I know this, I work all over the state. As much as I would like to highlight Montclair as an exemplar as I work with other towns, I'm not able to do that. This town continues to add new developments, but we're upgrading our transportation network to align with the infrastructure needs of these projects. I've no doubt this board is a bit weary of hearing about pedestrian safety every time they have an application from a developer. A comprehensive plan adopted by this board and then implemented would alleviate the community's concerns. I encourage you to work with Bike Walk Montclair and other groups to bring about a more pedestrian and bike-friendly street network. In addition to the Montclair Safe Plan, there are state-level resources that we can put you in touch with that are available that I do with other towns. I do this, as I said, this is what I do for a living. The Lackawanna project is one of the more forward-thinking projects in that it has included pedestrian access and access for bike riders. The board should be careful not to confuse pedestrian access with pedestrian experience. The board is interested in providing desperately needed full-service supermarket to the 4th Ward. Supermarkets impose certain structural constraints, like loading docks, that must be provided. No one likes walking next to a loading dock, but that doesn't mean the area is unsafe for pedestrians. It's just not that pleasant an experience. Neither is walking along an empty, blighted lot because potential tenants don't have what they need. Again, pedestrian access and pedestrian experience are two very different notions that should not be confused with each other. Regarding pedestrian safety within the development, the parking lot of the supermarket has inherent traffic calming or speed reduction features built into it by virtue of including the railroad stanchions in the design. This creates what engineers term visual friction, which is a technical term for business that causes drivers to actually slow down. No separate cordoning off of pedestrians is needed, as the entire area will function as a shared space among drivers, pedestrians, and bike riders. If the town would embrace a focus on pedestrian and bike rider access town-wide under a Complete Streets umbrella, we should see fewer drivers to the location as time goes by. When that happens, the flexibility built into this space would enable it to be used for a variety of outside events, taking advantage of the creative use of the railroad structures. It won't always be a parking lot. Contrast that with the ideas presented by Mr. Rubacki, which work against a pedestrian and bike-friendly orientation and instead encourage more people to drive to the store. The drive-in stalls do nothing to free up parking spaces. They just make it easier for people to drive there. We should be making it easier for people to walk, bike, or use public transportation, not drive there. Further, merchants would be required to staff drive-in stalls, which is an expense, while at the same time losing the benefit of incidental sales from patrons who walk in and browse. Why would a retail tenant sign up for that? Lastly, stalls are a maintenance headache for the landowner. That same space can accommodate a bike corral, which is 12 bikes plus a shuttle stop. The design cordons off pedestrians unnecessarily, as the entire parking area has a potential for shared space. So just to summarize, the supermarket and the parking lot design provide safe pedestrian access as it stands. Again, access and experience are two different goals. Safety of streets around the project falls to this board to address. Encouraging more drivers to the location only works against those safety goals. Thank you.
Good evening, members of the Planning Board. My name is Sharon Cockey. I live at 127 Undercliff Road, Montclair, New Jersey. I grew up most of my life from the time I was about maybe 4 or 5 years old on 38 Forest Street, which my father, who is now 99 and a half years old and one of the few surviving World War II vets, and my mother owned for over 62 years. My father recently purchased that house. He's still a Montclair resident because he lives with me. But I want to say that I feel that the Lackawanna project is very, very unique and dear to the residents of the Fourth Ward, but it is also a Montclair embraced event, because my father lived on Forest Street, as I said, and I grew up there, and that is the Third Ward. So it's also embraced and surrounded by the Third Ward, and where he lived was close enough to walk or to drive to the Pathmark. I'm also a former member of the Montclair Board of Adjustment, the zoning board. So I'm very concerned with parking as well as safety. And I just want us to understand that we need to move forward and that the parking does have to be taken into concern. And one of the reasons I bring that up is that another project, which was the Crosby's Bar, which is on the corner of Glenridge and Forest Street, has had and continues to create a very, very serious safety hazard with the parking, the valet parking, people just double parking. So whatever project and whatever turn this particular project takes, parking must be taken into consideration, because it's very unfair and inconvenient and unhealthy for the residents to not have adequate parking. And I say that from experience, from people parking in front of my father's driveway to the point where we had to call the police and have someone tow the car. And this was just one of few events. They parked in his driveway and all over the place. The Lackawanna Plaza has been a wonderful site and an attraction, if you want to call it much. There was a time when there were trains going back and forth through there, and it was, you know, considered a celebratory site. Right now, it is a visual blight. The only thing in there that attracts anyone is churches, is the Popeye's chicken when it's open, and you have a whole big parking lot which people use when they want to go to the Wellmont Theater or when they want to eat on Bloomfield Avenue and park for free, but it's not being used for anything, and it's not helping the citizens and the residents of Montclair, 4th Ward, 3rd Ward, or wherever, as well as other people in surrounding neighborhoods, because when the Pathmark was there, I would run into people I knew from Orange, East Orange, other places. So if you're trying to make Montclair this magnet that we all know that it is and should be, then there should be something there besides just Popeye's chicken that people can be attracted to, or free parking space for people who want to go to concerts at the Wellmont. I would urge you to please not get us into a stalemate the way the rest of the nation has gotten into with with workers being furloughed for 3 weeks, and at the end of all this process, nothing really was accomplished. We're still at the same point that we started. And I am just hoping that there can be some coming together of both parties, both sides, so that this project can be built. Senior citizens can have some place to park, some place to shop, and that Montclair can once be the shining beacon downtown that it always used to be. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Cheryl Eiten. I live at 35 Forest Street, Montclair, and I have been a resident here in Montclair all my life.
Bring the microphone closer.
Just pull it.
Is that better? Is that better?
Keep your voice up, too.
Okay. I'm told I have a soft voice, so I'll do my best. Is this better, or? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'm a longtime resident of Montclair, and I know that Lackawanna Plaza is near and dear to almost every resident's heart. With the issues of parking, there are a lot of issues with parking in Montclair, especially in the 3rd Ward. As Ms. Cockey stated earlier, with Crosby's being on Glenridge Avenue, and now parts of this project will be on Glenridge Avenue, the parking is a true concern. And although we're concerned with being able to drive there and park, a lot of residents in Montclair like living here because they want to be able to walk even though they have a car. They want to be able to walk and get around, walk with their children, bike with their children, and be able to move throughout the downtown and feel safe doing that. So having spaces for us to do that is a serious consideration that should be made. In addition to that, having a supermarket there is vital for the 3rd Ward, the 4th Ward, other cities that come in to shop which have not done that. So when you talk about the taxes, and the gentleman was speaking about having to go to West Caldwell to shop and Bloomfield to shop, I know when I was shopping in the Pathmark, there would be people there from the Oranges, from Clifton, from the Caldwell, so you had other monies coming into the town that you don't have any longer. And when they would come into the town to go there, they were also stopping at other places to take care of business. So it's something, you know, to get a move on if we can. Don't want this to be a stalemate. Tired of, you know, basically beating a dead horse, coming to these meetings and it seems like it's going nowhere. But we definitely want a supermarket. Don't want this project approved and then end up with no market for the citizens. Thank you.
That completes the 3 registered lists. Wait, was an eye on there?
That's Mr. Hain.
You may have Bruce Hain? Yeah, you were called a while ago.
Well,
The floor is yours.
oh, dynamite. Well, now, the problem is...
Mr. Hain, you need to speak into the microphone.
Yes, I need to put my things on. Well, I'll start in anyway. I'm here to explain to you or show you why I believe that it's not necessary to take down the platform sheds, or whatever you want to call them, in order to have a going concern. And I think, you know, if you did it my way, you would have a going concern by virtue of all the goodwill you would get. It might not be, immediately so remunerative, but anyway, I think I know the best way to do it. So, if
Mr. Hain, this is a portion of the meeting where we're not taking testimony, but we're taking comment about the testimony and the evidence and the
about
right, and so far you've been on point. You've given your comment that you know the right way to do it, and that it can be done in a different way. However, your proposal, unless you're going to tell me, even at this point, even if you were to tell me that you're an expert and that you have that you're an expert architect or a
concepts, though. You don't have to be an expert.
You do have to, in order to give testimony and present evidence in a hearing. You have to let me finish. You have to let me finish. You have to let me finish. In order to give that type of information, to present your way of doing it, you have to have some minimum establishment that you have some expert knowledge or some expert skill that would allow you to comment. This is public comment, right? And public comment basically is what you've said up to this point. It doesn't include showing us your way of doing it. Your comment is basically that there's another way to do it that doesn't involve taking down the sheds.
Well, if no one sees this, if someone sees it and likes it, it could change this whole problematic business with tearing down a thing which would better be left.
I understand that, but there are certain requirements that we have to adhere to in this hearing. Okay, and
could you be a little more?
I would if you'd give me a chance to complete the sentence. Okay, the requirements that we have to have in order to have your kind of anything beyond an opinion about how something can be done. In other words, the specifics.
Well, that's all it is.
The specifics of what you want to show maybe on your slideshow, that's something that would have to qualify as testimony.
I don't see why that is.
Well, I'm sorry, but I can't take the time this evening to explain it to you. What I can tell you is that we're willing to listen to your opinion. We're not willing to let you present new plans, because that is not the point. That is not the point of this portion of the hearing. And what you're putting, these statements are not evidence, and even though it might have been a solution, there's nothing that stops you from presenting that solution directly to the applicant if you want to.
Well,
but presenting it in the course of public comment here is not the proper way to do it.
Okay, well, let's see. So we'll skip the pictures.
And you've already, and again, we've got a time limit going on here.
Okay.
We've already indicated that you think that there's a better way to do it.
Well, the worst thing about it, the reason he finds it intolerable is because the front is centered at the same, the architect has put the front at the same 0 seconds, 0 minutes as the darn train station, centered on the train station, and you look across and that the old buildings of the train station tower 10 feet off the, better than 10 feet, 11 feet. I only look at Google Earth. I don't go there. But They tower 11 feet, and it's not the most attractive thing, because I don't think this 1984 rethink was so very careful, and I don't think it was Blinder's work. I mean, you see.
Well,
all
okay.
this
Well,
stuff.
we understand that you don't like what's up there, and we understand that you think that there's a better way to do it. Is there
This is his reason for saying it's impossible to do it this way, because it's right in front of the entrance. See?
So you think if
nobody wants to walk out the front door and see that.
you think it should be done differently, that it could be done differently?
Yeah.
Again, okay.
Yes.
Is
There's
there
a way
is
to make it very beautiful
is there
across the street with the existing shed.
understood?
And
Understood. We understand that you have an opinion. We also, from our testimony, have received other opinions on how this should be designed. So we understand that. Is there?
That in testimony, but you're not willing to hear this, I guess.
Yeah, because it was testimony, and testimony is closed right now. We're beyond that.
Well, I mean, what you got with Mr. Rubacki, I was glad to found that each stanchion is now accounted for, and you spent a lot of time on that.
Great.
But
So
one
beyond,
thing
is there anything else that you want us to know
All
about
right,
this
all right.
application?
The station is like a comet. It's shaped like a comet. I mean, it's consciously, back then in 2013, consciously aware of its
So what about that? What about that being shaped?
necessity and
What's
reason
what's the
trade.
issue with that?
And you see, those so-called stanchions that line up behind, that's the beginning of the tail. See, it has the head, the station, and the tail that goes
Gotcha,
back.
but what
And
does that have to
take
do with
them
the
out.
application?
See, when they did that in 1984, they put a blind wall there on.
So that wasn't the way to do it. We got
No,
it.
no,
So
no.
and there's another way to do. Is there anything else that you want us to
I
know?
think it would make it a little more palatable for shoppers. I mean,
If
these
what?
little
If what?
oriel
If what?
windows and stuff and light-colored. What are they doing?
Okay.
You know, it's not designed. Well, that's what I think. I mean,
It's
that's
not designed well. We got that.
It's not designed to be very attractive. There, it's sort of it's a blind wall.
We understand. Is there anything else that you want us to hear about it?
Well,
Besides your
is there
presentation?
some way I can submit this?
You can certainly give it to the applicant, and he's free to look at it if he wants
The
to.
planning board should see this.
No,
and
it's-
I don't understand your reason for
Because
doing this, because I don't think you're interested in making an appropriate decision. It doesn't sound like it to me.
And that's because you clearly don't understand the process. I can't take the time to.
Overly
I can't.
familiar with
No,
process.
no. I would beg to differ. The comments that you're making more than demonstrate that you really are not familiar with the process and what we have to do in order to make a decision. No, I can't explain. Sometime, but not this evening. But thank you for your comments. I was about to say that we have entered into the portion that we're off the list now. So it's first come, first serve. From this point out, I see that we have one person standing in queue. So I would suggest that you take your cue from that person, and Ira, if you would step up, and we'll keep the comments continuing.
My name is Ira Smith, resident of 15 The Crescent. I'm here speaking on my own volition to give you some thoughts. If Seinfeld were here, he might say, "What's the deal with the sheds?" And I want to actually talk about the sheds, because I think there's been some confusion about their relevance. What is the shed? What's a stanchion?
Oh. Should I start over?
No, you're fine. You're fine. We
I was
heard
loud
you.
enough. Okay.
We've heard you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Chair Wynn and members of the Planning Board. I was a member of the Montclair Historic Preservation Commission when we organized in 2003 to extend the Town Center Historic District west of Park Street and east of Willow Ave. The chair of the HPC at the time, Jerry Musher, was concerned that if the expansion failed, it would sink historic preservation in town for years. but the expansion was a success. It added dozens of town center properties to the list of those protected under the bylaws of the MHPC and its associated standards of treatment for historic properties as dictated by the Secretary of the Interior. I want to focus on how and why Lackawanna Plaza was a part of that expansion. Of the 73 properties nominated in 2003, only 10 were identified as key, that's in quotes with a capital K, which is the highest status historic designation available for local landmarks. Key is for, quote, those buildings which possess distinct architectural and historical significance and which act as landmarks within the architectural matrix of the district. Of those 10 key properties, only 2 stood east of Willow, 295 Bloomfield Avenue and Lackawanna Plaza in its entirety. It was clear through public outreach and hearings that the primary justification for the eastward expansion was Lackawanna Plaza. There were concerns. Did it matter that the railroad tracks didn't exist anymore? Did it make sense to landmark a site that was visually dominated by surface parking? In the end, what mattered was recognition of the integrity of the property as a place where people traveled by train. It sounds so simple. But in particular, the HPC saw and understood that the 1980s renovation had preserved and adaptively reused the largest, most distinctive part of the 1913 train station, the original platform canopies that related directly to the mode of travel, trains, and their original scale. The platform canopies, which some people call sheds, are technically the steel columns that form a Y, and they have a concrete roof on top. That whole composition is the platform canopies. They sheltered people on the canopies as they waited for trains, as you know. For me, it was like the passing of a baton, inheriting the wise decisions of our predecessors and safeguarding them for future generations. It never occurred to me, and I'm still shocked, that the platform canopies would be removed or modified beyond recognition. They are the symbol, for me, of the train station. The train station building is merely a building without the rest of the comet, and I love that image. You really don't know what you're looking at. Imagine for a moment that something wonderful and spectacular happened in this very room, and it was decided that we would honor the space by, quote, preserving it. Let's say the designer came back by stripping away the walls, the ceiling, the dais, the chairs, and left 6 columns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. They're all here, for those of you who haven't noticed them before. And they said, well, the 6 columns, well, actually, wait a minute, by the way, we'll remove 1 column, similar to what's planned for Lackawanna. How would we react to that? I don't think we would call it preservation. It would be something quite spare and abstract and non-functional. And this is what Chair Wynn talks about when he asks, will people even know the difference? And I submit, yes. If you remove the concrete roofs from the platform canopies and leave the columns bare, people will notice. The steel columns or stanchions will not carry the weight of history, literal or figurative. It will just be the very strange columns in the town center's largest parking lot. My suggestion is that the planning board fashion a resolution that protects the platform canopies in full. Frank Rubacki's proposal shows we can have the necessary parking while retaining most of the canopies. I encourage the planning board to embrace that. The images produced by John Reimnitz and David Greenbaum show that the space under the platform canopies is an amazing destination. I encourage the applicant to recognize that and use those images as overtures to more enterprising supermarket tenants. Last, I think there's no excuse for any of us to be confused about what to do with Lackawanna Plaza in 2019. There have been decades of local, state, regional, and national action and law, providing us a clear path and example for how we and developers truly invested in Montclair values should treat the site. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Susan Baggs. I live at 51 Cambridge Road here in Montclair. I used to serve on the Board of Adjustment, and I'm an architect and I've lived in Montclair for 17 years. I'm very familiar with the site, and I'm here to speak with you tonight just to just bring up a few points. I know that your job is to weigh the pros and cons of this application and to judge it fairly based on the evidence presented and knowing all that you know. What I would like to point out is that I haven't, I actually spent some time going through all the past presentations and reading the minutes, and what I have not really heard much about is anything really justifying the need for this parking variance, which is an extremely big ask that the applicant is making a request for. We haven't heard much at all about why we need such a big variance from the requirements of parking. They refer to this as the uses are permitted on the site. That's true. So it is an as-of-right application, but they still do need to comply with the parking requirements. So one of the things that really disturbs me about the application is that for 5 years we all have been very clear with the town council and this planning board that we always wanted to keep the supermarket in place. We've always said we like the pedestrian tunnel underneath Grove Street. It's a public amenity that we always wanted to maintain. I read through testimony here that Mr. Stoller stated that he purchased the property in August 2014 and that in March 2015 Pathmark filed for bankruptcy. That's not true. Pathmark was a going concern at the time. They did not file for bankruptcy until July. They were in business until November of 2015. I think that what we are missing here is support from our town council with respect to the need and importance of the grocery store that goes beyond anything that is land planning. I think that it would be helpful if we could all get together and talk with our town council about that. As my time is up, all I would like to say is one last thing. I feel like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. All I want is a supermarket. Well, guess what? There is a supermarket there. It worked for 30 years. It was still viable until the rent was raised and someone did not maintain the building. We could have it today. We don't need all of this. And yeah, I think that it's up to the planning department to decide whether the pros and cons are justified in granting this big parking variance. Thank you.
Adriano, 248 South Willow Street. I agree with all the speakers that are opposed to the current plans, but I would just like you to look at some of the work that the current builder has already achieved. If you look at the hotel that is on its way up, one whole part of that wall is already crumbling. I don't know if those were all put up in patches or however that brick was applied, but there's a whole part totally crumbling. To me, that has a huge message. And I have no faith in the constructions, the plans. You look at towns around here, Little Falls, Verona, West Orange. The new buildings are charming, they're beautiful, they aren't obstructing the view. We're totally missing the aesthetics on this project.
Hi, good evening. My name is Kevin. I'm a 50-year resident of the South Ward of Montclair. Also, my background is in business. I'm not an architect, I'm not a planner. I don't know anything about bike paths. But in this particular thing, it's clear we have two issues. We have a support, or we have a focus on sheds. These sheds are century-old sheds, and also the need for a supermarket. For the most part, there's an intersection of those interests. People are interested in having both of them. But one thing I see missing from this proceeding, from a business standpoint, is we have a lot of people saying what can happen or what should happen, and we've sent through some very, and pardon my language, but very anally detailed visions of what it should be when the people here have already done that. We've seen from the historical society, somebody come up to be an expert. He gives his opinion based on the Secretary of Interior regulations, and it's an interpretation. Then he doesn't even have the regulations with him. So I just want to say this. If it's not clear, I support the supermarket. I support the project. Let's not fool ourselves. If we start at the top of our Orange Road on Bloomfield Avenue, we've got a hotel there that's 6 stories. We have some condos coming down. If we go all the way down to Seymour, I don't want to hear anything about parking. Where are people going to park in Seymour? The people who are living there now have nowhere to park. If we go down farther, where the church used to be, there's an apartment building. If we go down farther, there's another apartment building. And most of this is all in the 4th Ward. So what I'm saying is this: we need to balance these two competing things, these sheds and also the supermarket. From a business standpoint, you're not going to have a 154-unit building and you don't have a supermarket there. So we know there's going to be a supermarket. It has to be one that's good. The other point is, if a supermarket's going to come, what guarantee are they going to take the vision of these two presentations that were made, or even take the vision of the sponsors of the project? They're the ones who are deciding. Everybody knows the people who are real estate agents, you give a commercial client a white box, and he puts his image in it. There are no supermarkets that are going to allow you to design their brand. Maybe Whole Foods and maybe King's, because these are premium niche markets. The other ones, they have their own. You go into a ShopRite in Bloomfield, in South Jersey, Atlantic City is going to be the same. A Stop and Shop or whatever. I don't think that we should place a complete concentration on the sheds. For example, if you look, I know my time up, but a couple other people went over, and I was very patient waiting, so I just want to make a couple of more points. Did I miss the annual commemoration of the sheds? Did we have that? Do we ever have that? Did I miss that memo? If you're really sincere about these sheds, there better be a commemoration next year and the year after that. Or don't come here with all this highfalutin stuff or anything when you're not taking into consideration the needs of the entire town. We're all in this town together. No one's going to get everything they want. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Amy Minkoff. I'm a resident of the 4th Ward at 24 Elm Street. I'm a new homeowner there. And I'm grateful to this planning board for the time and effort you've given to this initiative, as well as to my fellow concerned citizens who have been coming to the meetings. I'm new to this issue, and I'd like to just share my perspective. Until I moved here in June of 2018, I've been visiting Montclair for decades, admiring it as a destination place, and I dreamed of moving here. And I came because of the social and cultural diversity, the urban vibe, and yes, the beautiful historical architecture. I believe there is no other town like ours in northern New Jersey. And here I am now as a new resident. I want everyone in this room to know that I support a grocery store, safe access for cars, walkers, and cyclists. I support the notion of Lackawanna Plaza as a magnet for our community, accessed from all four sides. I believe in maintaining the historical integrity of the station, and yes, that includes the sheds. I believe, based on the testimony I've heard, that a supermarket and preservation are both possible and not mutually exclusive. And from my perspective, historical integrity of this site is a foundation for meeting the needs of our community today and in the future. Please do not approve a plan as it exists unless it is modified to ensure potential for a supermarket and also maintains historical integrity of this site. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Most. I'm a resident and also representing the voice for Station Square, which is 295 Bloomfield Avenue in Montclair. We have 9 residential units and a few commercial units there as well. We are, I guess, key, and we're designated historic building. And so we have some concerns that I want to voice today. That is concerns about additional traffic congestion during and after the construction. We have concerns about parking. We already have issues with people parking in our lot. I'm sorry? Is that okay? Okay, great, thank you. We do have concerns about parking because we're already seeing issues just getting in and out of our building and people parking in our lots and blocking our parking.
I'm sorry, can you tell me where Station Square is?
Yes. Sorry.
Where is it?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
295 Bloomfield Avenue.
Which is?
The historic building right across the street from Lackawanna Plaza.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that said, again, we are concerned about having protection against damage to our building as a result of the development. You know, we are not sure what recourse we have if there's cracks to our foundation as the development's being made. We're not sure if we can, you know, ensure the equipment that they're using will minimize damage to our historic building. And also there's a stream that runs under us, and other work that has been done has caused us to have a lot of flooding to our basement. We just had to spend $140,000 to redo the entire parking lot and the area underneath because of the way the tables work with the stream that's there. So I just want to make sure that we're considering that, and the sewer lines as well, and how that can affect us. We're concerned about the quality of air and dirt in our building as a result of the construction, and you know, just the rodents and also the noise. You know, we all live there. This is our house. So when they're doing construction early in the morning, late at night, trucks coming in and out, trucks idling could also be a problem. We love our historic building at 295 Bloomfield Avenue, and we also would not like a big ugly box store across the street. So if there's any way we can keep it looking beautiful, that would be great. And that's everything I have today. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lisa Ann Renner. I live at 42 Godfrey Road in Montclair for 25 years. I'd like to make 3 points. The first one is that from a historic preservation standpoint, it's really important to keep the complete ensemble of this historic site. By that I mean not just the Pig and Prince main terminal building, but it's absolutely meaningless if you don't also keep the train canopies or sheds along with them. It's not just the individual buildings, but the entire ensemble that gives the site its significance as a train terminal. You wouldn't demolish the silo of a historic barn. You wouldn't demolish the water wheel of a historic grist mill. You wouldn't fill in the moat of a historic castle. So you shouldn't demolish the train canopies that are so integral to a train terminal. Removing them is like amputating an important body part. The developers knowingly bought a state and national registered building in a township historic district, yet they never hired, as far as I know, a historic preservation architect, one who specializes in historic buildings. Instead, they applied for a demolition permit. Preservation has not been the guiding light of this project from what we've seen in the plans. In fact, Brian Stoller is quoted in the New York Times in 2015 near the beginning is saying, quote, "Our goal is to completely redo that so it looks new and modern." End quote. That's not what I think we want here. That redo would demolish part of the sheds, cut out more than a dozen stanchions, and scatter them throughout the parking lot. This is not historic preservation best practices. This is Frankenstein preservation. The second point I'd like to make is let's stick to the spirit of the master plan that was so hard worked on. In one section, the primary activity corridors section of the master plan talks about Bloomfield Avenue and how no surface parking should be allowed to front onto these streets. Lackawanna lot already goes against this dictum, but it would be a mistake to exacerbate this by allowing an even larger parking lot equal in depth to what is in front of big box stores along Route 46. The historic preservation element of the master plan and its goals and objectives refers to safeguarding the township's distinctive visual character through the retention of existing resources and the discouragement of the demolition of historic structures. And the last point is I just want to emphasize, as many people tonight have, that a grocery store and historic preservation are absolutely compatible here. There are examples of this across the country, and the two coexisted in this very site for more than 25 years. It would be a grave and irreversible mistake to allow even partial demolition. What have you got left if the grocery store never materializes? Or if after a certain number of years, it eventually goes belly up? You've got nothing then but a vacant building and a squandered historic site. Lackawanna Plaza was the pride of Montclair a century ago. The planning board's action should restore that pride. Thank you.
Good evening. Adam Grace, 42 Godfrey Road. I have 2 points I'd like to make tonight. First, that the criteria in the town's historic preservation ordinance show why the board should reject the applicant's plan to destroy the train sheds. I know you're familiar with the criteria, and I'm not going to take the time to quote them here, but I'm referring, of course, to the standards of review in section 347-137 of the ordinance. Those provisions all basically say the same thing, which is don't destroy what makes a landmark significant. And the answer to the question, what makes the train sheds worth preserving, can be found in those provisions. 100-year-old train stations are not a dime a dozen. The Lackawanna station is a landmark not just for Montclair, not just for New Jersey, but for the nation. We are fortunate that such a wonderful example of our transportation history lies within our borders, but that also means that we are tasked with the responsibility of preserving it for future generations. Whatever you may think of the sheds from an aesthetic perspective, and I myself do think that they have an industrial beauty to them, they are an integral and irreplaceable part of what makes the landmark station historic. And that is why when the site was redeveloped in the 1980s, the train sheds were protected and the majority of the shed supports were preserved in place. Then to today's eye, the 1980s era construction itself that surrounds the sheds may not be the most attractive by today's standards, but the plan that was used when that was put up was true to the principle embodied in subsection B10 of the standards in our own ordinance that I referred to before. And I'll quote from that subsection, quote, "New additions or alterations to structures shall be done in such a manner that if such additions or alterations were to be removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of the structure would be unimpaired." And that's really what preservation is about. Saving the historic elements for tomorrow so that one developer's current vision isn't allowed to destroy them forever. The landmark you are statutorily obligated to preserve doesn't end once you step outside of the Pig and Prince. It extends throughout the current mall and the sheds that stand as a significant example of an early 20th century train station. This landmark has been commercially viable for decades, serving the community with a supermarket with the sheds in place, and it remains able to do so. There is no legal basis to allow the developer to change the status quo. So why does the developer want to tear down the shed supports? In part, as I understand it, part of the reason would be that expanding the existing parking lot will also help fill a need created by the proposed development on the land across Grove Street. And that brings me to my second point, which is that accommodating any desired development of the other parcel across Grove Street is not a permissible justification for alteration of this key building in the Town Center Historic District. In 2004, when the town expanded the eastern boundary of the district to include the land across Grove Street, the nomination report said this, quote, "The proposed expansion will result in a number of important developments, including the creation of a buffer area for the D.L.&W. Railroad Station, which is one of the key structures in the existing district. How can development of that buffer become a contributing cause to the partial demolition of the very structure to be protected? To allow that would turn our preservation ordinance on its head." In closing, it seems odd to have to stand before the planning board of Montclair and say, please don't allow a developer to destroy a national landmark in our boundaries, but that's what I'm saying. Thank you.
Mr. LeVay, we don't normally permit twosies. If there's an additional comment that you want to make real quick, let you go ahead.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, sorry to take up other people's time. I'll be quick. So, one of my other points that I want to mention is, having grown up in this town, I know a lot of people who have been inconvenienced by the absence of a supermarket, and a lot of those people I'm friends with, and their parents still live in town. That's all.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Fogel. I live at 16 Forest Street. I want to say first how much I really appreciate the work that the planning board does. I've spent the time to look at everyone's backgrounds to see what people bring, and it's really a rough job, and I appreciate it tremendously. And I would never even pose the question to put anyone on the spot in terms of what they have in their hearts. But I just want to express my reaction to coming to meetings for the past plus year. And that is that somewhere along the way I became aware that the developer is not obligated to put it in a supermarket. And I keep hearing things that have been said, and I've heard the developer mention about the hardships and how they want mega stores. And then when we had a wonderful expert talk about other plans, I never saw anything go with that. And I'm sorry to be negative because that's not my nature, but I really don't believe it's the intention for there to be a supermarket here. That's really what I believe. I believe that the intention of this development is to have housing and whatever is most lucrative. And very much because of me fearing that, I think the importance of maintaining the area is even more important, because I think there's kind of a little BS in this being about building this perfect supermarket. I think we have to maintain the place and allow for either a possibility or a likelihood that there will not be a supermarket there. I've seen the decline in supermarkets in other places. A lot of people think that Fresh Direct is the best thing ever. So with great apologies, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I have a feeling that a lot of people here recognize that we're not guaranteed at all that a supermarket is coming in.
Linda Cranston, Alexander Avenue. I wanted to point out for those of you that were not here during the years of torture when we were negotiating the master plan, that on page 28 and 30, 29 and 30, this property on both sides of Grove Street and including the Crane Park are zoned C1 transit zone, 6 stories, with a suggestion to go to 8 stories with 75 units per acre. I'm very concerned about this major parking variance. If approved, will be a permanent part of the property and could prevent a supermarket from coming in or being successful. However, it would allow any developer to go directly to zoning with a development proposal within that current zoning. Just wanted to mention that. It would, in other words, avoid the planning board altogether.
Hi, again, Justin Waldman, 11 Seymour Street, apartment 15, Montclair, New Jersey.
Well, again, we don't normally permit this. I'll give you time to make a very quick statement.
Yep. A previous speaker stated, what if the store went belly up and closed? Well, which is it? They won't have any customers and go belly up, or that they'll be so busy the traffic will be out of control. You can't have it both ways. The vast majority of this project preserves the site and gives us our grocery store. Let's get the shovels in the ground.
Carrie Heller, 1 Greenwood. Neither for or against. This is not what I would ordinarily do as a real estate owner, commercial property owner, developer. I've been in front of this board 3 times over the years. I don't think I've come in opposition. And I'm not opposing to an adaptive reuse of this property. They have every right to utilize what's there, as I've had a right, Mr. Wynn and the board, to use our Greenwood property, the CVS property, the former Montclair Ford property. But you try to come in and utilize what's there or the zoning that is there. But when you do come in for a large parking variance, a larger curb cut, nowhere to put the snow, it is incumbent upon the planning board to take it upon themselves to be sure that you're not giving more than you need to give. You have the right to put restrictions, and I'm going to just read a short statement on that, that I am neither in opposition nor for, but if this board chooses to allow this to go forward, and I leave that for the rest of the community for that position, but I need to protect what is ours next door. I know what I had to go through in reference to the park. We helped get the angled parking spaces. We had to be sensitive to the post office, Lackawanna, Greenwood, and other enhancements over the years, and this was back around 2003. With that, if you just bear with me, I promise not to be more than 2 minutes. On November 15, 2018, the developer came back with a set of plans. They did not include enumerating to the board, and this had to do with the loading area, where they reduced the size of the building, increased the size of the loading area, further removed the sidewalk. If you've all walked there, and right opposite the post office, there's now approximately a 70-foot sidewalk. And there's 2 curb cuts, one on either side. It's now going to be something, and Brian and I can disagree, but something between 95 feet and 105-foot apron. I've never seen an apron that big. I certainly have never seen an apron that big in the downtown, and I'm not going to tell you how unsafe I think that it is, but it is very unsafe. I hear pedestrians being talked about over and over again, in cars, but just trying to navigate that area, and the cars are going to come park in our parking lot, and they're going to come for the post office into this parking lot. I just offer you caution with reference to that. There's also 3 parking spaces and 3 trees that are going to be removed. Snow, we've talked about. There is nowhere in this enlarged paved loading area, and I respect the developer, I respect Brian, I respect them fully. To remove the snow, you have to have trucks and you have to have a backhoe. You have to push it first. There's nowhere to push it other than onto this 95-foot, 100-foot, 90-foot apron area. There's nowhere for the snow to go. I just ask you to please consider that. Truck circulation. We've talked about this. There's 6 truck movements that come from Glen Ridge Avenue. I know you've heard testimony on that, but you have nothing on the drawings that have been submitted to you that show how these trucks are going to get in and out of the parking lot when there's anyone else in the parking lot. They're going to be small trucks. There are going to be scores of box trucks during the course of any given day. Off-hour loading, please consider it. It's in front of Livingston right now for Starbucks. It's the Kings in Maplewood. It's in all sorts of locations. It's in New York City and Home Depot and others. You don't see trailer trucks coming in 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. It's just not a thing, and the markets will, if they want to come to Montclair badly enough, they'll accommodate that sort of schedule. And I'm just about finished. Will there be, I don't assume you're voting tonight in terms of restrictions or things that the board is going to consider. Is that something that we will get to speak to on a future meeting, or? No. So I shouldn't make my piece tonight. Thank you. Just with reference, there were some changes to the site plan with reference to some lighting in the loading area, some protections to keep trucks from coming into our underneath and to our ramp area. Those areas. The valeting of cars I spoke to previously, I would just urge, don't do it. You got a county road, you got traffic lights, you got pedestrians, you got stop signs. Make it work, but don't. And I don't know if it was the developer's idea or whether it's the board's. Let it go. Let them figure it out themselves. But to put the restrictions and to have valet, a lot of cars coming and going. You're going to have 4 car movements for every time one comes. In, it's out, and it's in and out again when picking up the person. If this were not already a supermarket, and there's 2 reasons. I happen to have been around in 1983. It was just getting started. UDAG grant and an EDA loan from the state of New Jersey is why this property occurred. You renovate to get around zoning or to save money. There's really no reason for this to be renovated in the form of a supermarket. The town needs a market, as I understand it. My CVS, apparently, I see the sales every year. They've become the supermarket, unfortunately, for people paying all too much money, and I see it in the sales. There's no question. I see it, and I see it in their sales, and they're very happy. There needs to be a market, but if you were starting over again and you had 5 acres of land on Bloomfield Avenue, either myself or Hampshire or Brian or any other developer, this is not what you would put here. And I understand we've come 4 years down the road. Please give it every consideration, whether it's other abatements, other considerations, height, anything else. Make this project work. Project needs to work for the town, but it perhaps needs to be tweaked and not pushed through at this point. And I understand 4 years running, it doesn't sound like it's being pushed through. Thank you.
So it appears that public has made all the comments that it wishes to make at this time. Now's your last chance.
I need to make an observation about the resolution that the Township Council made. Only.
Well, that doesn't have anything to do with what we're doing here.
Well, I just wanted to. I also heard the NAACP backing the resolution of the Town Council, but the plan that the resolution referred to had 40% less parking variance request in it, and I just thought it was worth mentioning that because it was changed afterwards.
Consider it mentioned. We're going to take a recess, and then we'll come back, and the applicant will be allowed closing comments.
We're back on the record.
Okay, we're going to get a motion to dismiss?
No, I don't think we'll go that far. But are they out in the hallway or something? Yeah.
That's the way it was done in the old days. Counselor, we got a call for you to walk out of the room and see if they take the vote on something they want to vote on. I remember 1975.
Thank you for your patience, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. As you can imagine, after that amount of public comment, some discussion about how exactly to sum up in an application such as this. So with that, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, it's been quite a year. As everyone is aware, even before getting to the planning board, the applicants participated in numerous meetings, received input in this application, including meetings with the Development Review Committee, 2 hearings before the Historic Preservation Committee, and even before that, numerous discussions regarding prior failed attempts to have a redevelopment plan adopted for the site. And over the course of time in which this application is presented, the applicants have listened to comments by the board, its professionals, and the public. The applicants have agreed with some of these comments, some of the comments not so much. And at the end of the day, the applicants have made substantial number of revisions to the plan in an attempt to compromise and strike the right balance between the objective of creating a mixed-use project that will, on the one hand, be successful, attract a supermarket tenant, and succeed in reactivating this section of Bloomfield as a place to live, work, and play, and on the other hand, balance the historic significance that the members of this board and some members of the public assign to the site. The nature of compromise is that not everyone is going to be happy. Not everyone is going to get everything that they want or that they feel is most important to them. This is a difficult site. In order to achieve the goal of attracting a supermarket tenant and succeeding in reactivating this section of Bloomfield as a place to live, work, and play, the applicant needs to balance the need to satisfy concerns about parking, given that the township code requires much more surface parking that could be provided or that many people in this room might want to see created. Need to balance the need to satisfy concerns about pedestrian activation and walkability for this section of Bloomfield, again, as a place to live, work, and play. I keep saying those words because that's in the master plan. And concerns about historic preservation. And this is to say nothing of issues like loading and architectural design consideration, which have been extensively testified to and have evolved thanks to the board's thoughtful input, as well as the thoughtful input of members of the board's professionals, as well as the public. So I want to touch on just a few things, responding to some of the public comments, and other elements of the application. So as to parking, first I want to say the applicant's professionals have demonstrated through extensive testimony that through a shared parking approach, the project will provide adequate parking for the demand generated by the project and will not leave a shortfall of hundreds of parking spaces, or as otherwise, as some people have alleged, inaccurately. The township's master plan, the unified land use and circulation element recognizes that the township's existing parking requirements are perhaps more applicable to suburban area needs and do not necessarily reflect the parking needs in areas such as where the Lackawanna Plaza is located and where there's mass transit opportunities. The master plan also recognizes the benefits of shared parking for mixed uses, such as what's been proposed here. We have, as testified to, 459 spaces on site, and the applicant is committing that it can accommodate in a peak period up to 499 cars. That's through a valet operation that was extensively testified to, in which Giosas, the board's parking consultant, suggested could work. And it should be remembered that, as testified to, it's projected that 11 out of the 12 months of the year that the site won't be looking to being operated in peak demand. Now, getting to the major concerns expressed, concerns about historic preservation. It should first be noted that the applicant proposes to save, restore, reuse, or recreate the following list of historic elements on site: the historic waiting room and the concourse structure to remain on site, the historic horse trough to be restored and relocated, the currently inaccessible stairs, sometimes referred to as the stairs to nowhere, to be reconstructed and replicated, the 9 historic piers being saved, 2 being relocated to the new driveway entrance, and memory boards and historic plaques being located and mounted to tell the story and remind people of the history of the station. And notwithstanding certain hyperbole that's been expressed, some outside the room, but expressed nonetheless, the applicant is not taking a bulldozer to the site to destroy a historic train station. The applicant's proposal needs to be viewed in the context of 2 competing arguments by some objectors and project opponents. Can the interior mall, where certain platform canopies remnants existed, be demolished, and should the applicant be required to build a grocery store inside the interior mall? So before I get into a little bit of the historic preservation argument on that front, we need to discuss that competing vision for the site that's been laid out. In other words, the alternative proposals to locate a grocery store inside the interior mall. And as to this point, what I would say is the board's attorney can certainly instruct the members of the board on this issue, but I would proffer that, and I think the members of this board are aware of this, the planning board's job is to review the application presented as to whether or not the site plan proposed is appropriate for circulation, safety, and other permitted considerations. The applicant's proposal in this instance concerns permitted uses, and whether the applicant has addressed concerns raised regarding these permitted points, which I would respectfully submit the applicant has. And also, other important consideration, whether the applicant has met its burden of proof in support of the variances requested, which I submit the applicant has, and is affirmed by testimony of Mr. Sean Moronsky from Langen, our professional planner. The planning board does not, as some objectors and opponents have attempted to request, have the role of voting on competing visions. It's not the applicant's site plan versus somebody else's site plan that's been presented. The applicants have proposed a project. They haven't proposed to build whatever project that somebody else proposes and would like the planning board to consider as an alternative. That being said, the next point I want to make is that the applicant's aforementioned compromises and attempts to preserve historic elements is dictated by the desire to bring a supermarket tenant to the site and the considerations that are relevant to why the applicant doesn't believe the interior mall could be converted to a grocery store. And I don't want to revisit all the testimony that's been given. The board has heard extensive testimony from the applicant's expert witness and the board's consultant testimony, which I'll just briefly summarize a few points. You heard from Mr. Robert Volson on behalf of the applicant. He talked about why grocery stores look the way they look and his belief as to why what the applicant is proposing works for this site. And then the board heard from, I believe his name was Brad Knabb, hopefully I didn't mispronounce that. He came in from out of state. What I would say is, to the disappointment of some project opponents, Mr. Knapp largely agreed with what Mr. Volson said, and that was that while anything is theoretically possible, Mr. Knapp didn't expressly disagree to what Mr. Volson had testified to about you have to also balance that with anything is possible, but you consider feasibility in the market based upon profitability concerns that tenants would have. And now, Mr. Knabb did discuss, in terms of trying to point out that there could be other creative options that exist, he pointed out two examples. He pointed out a specialty Italian market in Milwaukee, which Mr. Volleson responded to and pointed out that that's not really a traditional grocery store, so questioned sort of the applicability of that example. And then Mr. Knabb also testified regarding what he described as a West Reading building for Boyer's Food Market. I believe that was in Pennsylvania. And the important thing to note there is that that testimony concerned a concept design that wasn't a store that was ever built. The fact that what Mr. Knabb was saying was a potentially interesting, creative, maybe somebody can consider it, the fact that it wasn't built was the precise point that Mr. Volleson was trying to make. So that gets us to also another important thing that Mr. Knabb mentioned, which I don't know that resonated with everybody who is opposed to the project, but I've heard the word Reading Terminal Market thrown out a number of times this evening and over the course of this application, and notwithstanding that everybody loves that idea, Mr. Knabb actually spoke to that and said, he talked about the fact that, conceptually it sounds great, but you can't just make somebody build that. And he talked about a public market in Milwaukee. He called it the Milwaukee Public Market. It was, I think I'm quoting him here, it was supposed to be cool, it was supposed to be all these cool shops, but it failed. They couldn't get anybody to go in there, and over time the city put a lot of money into it, and they had a few places in there, but it's not a market, it's basically a shop or restaurants. There might be a wine retailer in there and a person that makes soaps, but it was really difficult, it didn't work. So we say that, we bring that up only to just remind the board what Mr. Knabb specifically testified to. As to the topic of historic preservation, as it then relates to this overall balancing of these competing considerations, the board heard extensive testimony from Dr. Stephen Bedford. We don't want to revisit all of it for the board. You've heard it certainly enough. But just to remind, Dr. Bedford wasn't just anybody. He was a Columbia University PhD. He was a Smithsonian Fellow in D.C. He had extensive experience with writing National Historic Register nominations, surveying structures for historic designations, and most importantly, just as a reminder, he doesn't just represent developers. This is a man with a substantial resume representing the interest of public entities seeking historic preservation of sites. Dr. Bedford first debunked an original argument that the site contained rare Lincoln Bush train sheds. That was the argument that was espoused by some project opponents until that was disproven, and then the opponents to the project pivoted to other claims. As for the platform canopies that existed at the site, Mr. Bedford testified that these were not particularly unique. They were standard design you could see in Austin all the way through the Boston-Washington corridor and all the way down to Union Station in Washington, D.C. And with respect to the canopies, Dr. Bedford testified that they had lost their historic integrity because the existing concrete had been partially removed, cut off at edges, new concrete poured adjacent to and over the existing concrete, new skylights created, connected to modern steel, all things this board has heard probably exhaustively. So this isn't, again, an application to demolish a historic site. There needs to be a resistance to the temptation to assign historic significance to the platform canopy minutes simply because they're on the same site as the Pig and Prince restaurant, and the associate the idea where the applicant is preserving 74 stanchions in place and preserving another 8 stanchions on the site. I think it's 82 out of 98. That this is no different than if we were proposing to take a bulldozer and scrape the entire site. That's at least that's our argument in rebuttal to much as what has been said. This brings us also a little bit away from the testimony by Dr. Bedford, but I wanted to respond briefly to some arguments regarding the enlarged parking lot that's in front of the proposed supermarket and with the proposal to keep the stanchions. The master plan at page 75 there's been testimony there, or the argument that discourages the idea of a proposed large parking lot. Again, our expert planner, when he testified, disagreed with that and noted that we were substantially reducing the amount of enlarged surface parking on Bloomfield by developing the east lot, and we were conforming with the goals of the master plan to create a mixed-use development that eliminated the low-scale, one-story buildings talked about in the master plan as not characteristic of downtown Montclair, and reinforcing this section of Bloomfield as a place to live, work, and play. And I believe there was also, I think at some point somebody may have suggested the idea that we were doing valet for the grocery store. That's obviously not the case. My apologies for the disjointed nature of a little bit of this, but trying to keep it brief. Before we came in here, I gave some of that summation. I had a conversation in the hallway with my clients, and they felt it was important to say the following thing. They are in the final stages. You may have mentioned we were down to 2 potential grocery store tenants. We're in the final stages of negotiating a lease with one of those. There's been multiple turns of the lease, and it's a value-oriented grocer. And this is coming directly from Rob Schmidt from Hampshire. We're going to try and make every effort, to the extent that the board doesn't reach a vote this evening, to try and get consent to release the name of that prospective tenant at the next meeting. But as no certainty on that front, but what hopefully the board can appreciate is without a signed lease in place, it's difficult for a going concern to want to insert themselves into this type of publicly heated exchange and debate. So, coming to conclusion, it's been an effort to compromise. The applicants have listened. They've attempted to address diverse and conflicting points of view. And as a result of that process, what everybody here hopefully should be proud of, whether they got everything they want or not, is, in the words of Mr. Nab, who testified, is that it's a really great looking development. We would argue the project is consistent with historic preservation. That is what Dr. Bedford's argued. And for purposes of granting the variance relief requested, for the project as a whole, there's been an argument that, I think confirmed that this is consistent with the township's master plan. But to be blunt, the applicant and the applicant alone bears the business risk in terms of building a project like this. So to give credence, and hopefully this board does not, to others who allege to know better than Hampshire in particular, which has 50 years of experience in the supermarket space, as to how to design or tenant or negotiate with tenants, would be inappropriate, would ignore the record, and ignores the realities that the applicants are going to build what they believe is economically feasible to build, presenting a project that is carefully balanced with competing interests, consistent with the township's ordinances, except with the variances as testified to, which there's support for. And we believe at the end of the day, everybody in the room should be proud that we've gotten to the right balance and compromise. Successful compromise, again, is not where everybody gets what they want. We don't all agree with each other. Hopefully we respect one another. It's one of the reasons I like working in Montclair. It's a very smart, engaged, informed board, professionals, public, challenge us, drive us crazy in the best possible ways, with great results. And all you have to do is vote yes as to where this process has gotten us to. So for that reason, the applicant respectfully submits the application should be approved with the variances and waivers sought, and we can discuss, obviously, the conditions that have been floated over the course of the application.
Right, Councilor, thank you. So that brings us to a close of the hearing. We are not going to make a decision this evening. This is the 13th meeting that we've had since March. We have approximately at least 50 hours worth of testimony, and several legal issues to consider. And there's just no way that we're going to be able to do all of that this evening. Between now and the next meeting, we really individually, we have our work cut out for us to, on our own, review what has been offered in the evidence and the various comments that have been made. And at the next meeting, we will begin our public deliberations and our discussion and questions that we may have, so that we can get to a point where we can figure out how we're on this application. So, Janice, the next meeting that is scheduled,
It's February 11th.
and so at that meeting we will begin our public discussion, and in between that point and now, I just want to remind the board that we shouldn't be discussing this. But I know I'm certainly going to have to come here and look at the exhibits and review certain things and go through the videos and re-listen to some of the testimony that was offered. So our individual work begins now, and hopefully, no guarantees. Hopefully at the next meeting we might be able to make a decision on this. But again, no guarantees, because this is, there's a lot going on here. I don't know how our discussion will go at the next meeting. I will know better myself after I take a look at a few more things. And I'm sure every one of the members of the board up here feels the exact same way. So, I'd like to thank everybody.
I was just wondering too, I would like to make a procedural comment or recommendation. I wanted to make a procedural recommendation in terms of how we might proceed with our next meeting. When I don't want to, I tried to raise it as an issue, but.
Carol, if you be my guest.
Okay. I know that probably everyone here who has something to say would like to make a comment, and when we get a chance at our next meeting. But I was thinking that it might be helpful to identify some topics that we need to make decisions about, such as the east parcel is one thing, the parking, the traffic flow, that we might think of categories that will have to be voted on and sort of organize so that we can talk coherently about topics. And maybe before our next meeting we could put in some of those topics or send some in to as a recommendation, as clusters under which we might organize our discussion at some point.
Well, I don't think that we should be sending anything in between meetings. This is a hearing on an application. This is not a legislative issue where we're deciding an ordinance or voting on the master plan. This is a hearing that we have to make a decision based on law and evidence. And part of that requirement for due process requires that we have that discussion on the record in the public. And that we don't have it individually, and that we don't have predetermined recommendations, drawn up and sent out before we even have discussed it.
I was not recommending recommendations. I was recommending that there may be some way of organizing. We have to talk about so many different issues.
Well, I don't.
That we may suggest what topics are reasonable topics to cluster them under.
I don't have a problem.
Content.
I don't have a problem with that. But I don't even know whether we can. I don't even know whether we're in the position to cover all of that now, because again, after 13 meetings, I know that we have big issues. We have issues on parking, we have issues on historic preservation, and we have, issues on pedestrian safety and walkability. But I know those aren't the only issues that we've got to discuss too. And right now, I've got so much up here that I need to go and go through everything just to figure out the whole scope of it, because of course, the things that people have discussed ad nauseum are very clear in my mind, but there's a lot of topics that we addressed that there was maybe only 5 or 10 minutes worth of conversation about or testimony about that we still have to make a decision on. So we can't even come up with an exhaustive list. So that's what I'm saying. If there's certain things that you want to suggest, I mean, be my guest. But certainly, you know, there's going to be, whatever you come up with, I'm sure there's going to be other stuff that we're forgetting now, that we're going to, as we start to go through everything, we're going to remember between now and the next meeting.
Agreed. I agree with that.
So if you want to put that, if you want to do that now, we could, and suggest what things need to be on that list. If you want to give it some thought, and then we can, at the beginning of the next meeting, you know, say, oh, here are all the topics that we need to discuss. Does this
That's
include
fine.
everything? However you know, but.
No problem.
If you do that, I think you should direct it to Janice and myself.
Well, I was thinking.
Well, I don't even think, yeah, I don't even think that it's necessarily something that we have to send in to them. We can, of course, we have to decide amongst ourselves, and we should be doing that on the record at the next meeting.
Do our bylaws allow individual board conversation out of the hearing about not the content of the issues, but procedure or categories?
Conversations with who?
With other board members.
No.
No.
We have to have
That's
that
not
on the
my
record.
recommendation at
If
all.
there is a question, I believe, if you have a specific question that you want to ask
Come to
the
me.
attorney,
Yeah.
you can contact him directly.
Or suggested
but-
conditions, you know.
But
Yes.
we're not supposed to be discussing this
Agreed.
ex parte.
And what about questions to our board consultants? Should we deal with them directly? Should we go through you?
If you have an individual, the consultants work for the board, they work for all of us.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
If you have an individual question then you should contact the consultant directly and get from them an answer to your question.
Yeah. Let me just say this. Ordinarily, in most cases, really don't want individual board members contacting the professionals and basically running up the bill and having.
Exactly.
But in this instance, with the chairman, I know. Just let me get it out, okay? But what the chairman's saying in this case is, go ahead and do it.
Okay.
Yeah, because there's just too much.
Too much
There's
stuff.
too much
Get
stuff
what you need.
here.
Get what you need so you can help us.
But should that be shared with others?
No.
Oh,
Well, you can share it with at the next meeting.
At the next meeting.
At the next
Okay.
meeting.
At the meeting,
Okay.
you just can't do it in the meantime.
All right. I have a question for you.
If you could just
One at
CC
a
me,
time.
if you could just CC me on your communications so
Okay.
that.
That makes sense, so that there's no duplication.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a better
Well,
way.
there might even be duplication. You can ask, you two might have to ask the same question, but there should be individual
right.
back and forth. It shouldn't be him sharing the answer, you know, because that opens up too many doors that we don't want to open.
Exactly.
So I have a question for you, Mr. Galvin. At the last meeting, it was, I guess you assigned to the council to come up with a position memo on whether federal funding was involved.
I have both of those, and we'll get them out to the board.
Okay, thank you.
And I was satisfied with the memos that
That what?
the answer is there is no need to contact SHPO, and there is no the federal. You can help me out here. What was the give me the digested version.
The Reader's Digest version is that with respect to the UDAG funds that may have been involved in the project in the 1980s, we're not 100% sure that UDAG funds were involved, but it doesn't matter at this point. That would have imposed an obligation with that 1980s project, potentially as it was being built or if it was being done in phases, but once the project was completed, that ends the
Obligation.
The obligation.
So there's no in perpetuity?
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So we get an adequate legal answer on that, in my opinion.
Okay.
Other points that are questions that you want to bring up? If not, I'd just like to thank the public for their participation and for their patience and for their input, and likewise to everybody who contributed to this. And we will pick this up, as I said, at the next meeting. We still have some business to transact after this, so we'd ask that you exit quietly so that we can continue doing business.
Thank you, Mr.
But thank you.
So we have a resolution.
So we just have
And some bills
Right?
to pay.
We have the
Always.
the architect's appointment.
to accept the architect.
We're reappointing Barton. Okay.
Yeah.
I can't really hear, I'm sorry. We still have a meeting.
I love the work.
Yeah, I know, it's cheap,
What?
cheap grocer, yeah, I know, I thought
That'll be at the next meeting. It's not tonight.
It's
great. Ms. Lockman, do you want to start?
I have some changes to the resolution. Just some, okay. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay, the third line, first paragraph, third line, not exceed. There's no comma after exceeding. I mean, they're just, hey, it's got to look, it's
good.
Yeah, no comma after exceeding. Okay, the third paragraph, the last line, it's competitive bids, plural.
Okay.
The next, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fifth whereas paragraph, the last line, it should be and not to exceed the amount of.
Right.
Are you going to put an amount in there, I guess?
No.
No? Okay.
Paid through the escrow.
Okay. And the line above that, applicants is possessive.
The line above.
What I just was looking at.
Line above $0. Where
$0.
It ends
It's
in
applicants is
Should be
possessive.
apostrophe S, I think.
Okay. Yep.
I think I got it all.
Okay.
Do I?
I don't have anything else.
All right.
Thank you.
So
Thank
I need
you.
Motion to
Motion to
approve
appro-
with changes.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Bills?
Okay. So I did get your change to the bill. I just included
to the ledger.
I included the wrong ledger.
Oh,
I
okay.
had updated it since then, but I updated it so frequently that the wrong version was included in the packet.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, just for everybody else, there was a couple
Yeah.
ledger amounts that weren't quite right, and there was something missing.
Yeah.
But overall, the bills are fine, in my opinion. And I'd move to approve them.
It's good enough for him. I'll second.
Okay, and
All right.
second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay.
So we
All
have
right, everybody. Thank you.
No. We have any committee reports?
No, the committee report was the only was the personnel for the
That's
architect.
it?
That was it. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
I think that concludes. We're fully staffed now, right? We have all of our.
Well, we're still waiting the mayor's appointment for the class 3 person.
Oh, yeah. For
Well,
Mr.
I mean,
Brandon.
but board professionals.
Yes, the board professionals.
Board
are fine.
professionals.
Good.
We're all
We're good.
staffed.
We met with the board engineer this morning.
Did he retire?
And, once we get a new application,
Yeah.
he'll start coming to the meetings.
Okay. Great.
He just stopped coming? Yeah.
Has anyone spoken to the mayor?
I sent him an email. I'll probably send him a follow-up email.
That would be a no.
I think it was 6 weeks ago I sent the email.
What happened to Craig?
You know, we should appoint.
Craig? I don't know. He resigned.
He just resigned?
I don't know why.
Bianco? Oh, geez, Louise. Oh, my God.
We're still on the record.
No, that was Tom retired. The class 3 board member. He resigned. Okay.
Okay.